welcome, 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 Joe, Christian, Colin. My screen is only so big. Hold on. Where everybody going? ITC, Jaden, Miguel, Quinta, JT, Sal, Scotty. What's up? What's up? It's all. It's all. Hola, ¿cómo está? How was the weekend? Anybody have a good long time? Bien, you too? Yeah, it was a good. I'm good. Call it good. It is cold. It's stupid cold. I hate cold. Tooth connected. Bum, 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 bum. All right. So we got some news overnight or over the weekend. Boeing, it was probably, I guess it was like Friday. Boeing had a plane start on fire. That was awesome. Recorded, went social or went viral. Nice ball of fire scraping across the sky. So that was fun. I don't know if it's going to have any effect on their stock anymore at this point. It could, but we'll see. Nothing really big developmentally out of like the Middle East or anything. So everybody is pretty much just seems to be going traveling. The markets seem to be business as usual. They're gapping up right now. They're higher than they were on Friday by a decent amount. We can see that if we look at ES on a 5-minute scale here. This is where we closed. Okay. That's where ES closed. That's where SPY closed. And we're up here. Just up here doing our thing. Trump a dump a dump. 383, 384 on the specs. They not that I saw. I didn't look too deep into it. I assume it's probably an engine. And if I'm not mistaken, Rolls Royce makes a majority of engines. It's just that Boeing has just been in the news, and it never seems to be helpful for them. Never seems to be helpful. So right now on SPY Daily, we're up probably around 383, 384, I want to say. So we're well above our target for the three gap system. Nice. Went right to target and stopped on Friday. Loved it. Maybe they were. I don't know. We'll take a look at Boeing though. Nick Quinta, RH Rupee, JB, Jaden. Welcome everybody to the Sunday night uh, market scan. That's what we're calling it. Yeah. This is where we go over it's basically where we go over all the like the major players in the stock market and try to get a feel of how things will be going in the next week. And it's been a fun ride thus far. We've been watching a few setups over the past couple months now. We were waiting for Apple's drop because of um, the divergence between Apple and SPY. We got the Apple drop now. Now SPY is ripping to all-time highs. We were watching this three gap system here that hit right to a T on Friday. So it's been going pretty well. So I'll be going over pretty much the big 10 that I have, plus any other requests that anybody tosses out. I'm going to touch on a few requests from last week too, just because they're here still. And yeah, we'll give it like one more minute. What up, Hugh? Doing well, doing well. How about yourself? Is the fan? I've got a fan on to the side of me. Is it an issue or no? Nah, cool. All right. If anybody has any tickers they want to add to the list, toss them in chat. Can you see the bar chart fine? Does everything look legible? Should I make it smaller? Baba's on the list. All right. All right. So one of the things I like to do most when I'm doing this, SoFi is already on the list. Thank you. Got that day trade set up for tomorrow. Take a look at it. SoFi is not one that I typically day trade, but it's nice for some swings. So I start on a higher time frame, usually on the weekly or the monthly, and then work my way down. Uh, just for the record, this is in no way financial advice. This is uh, I'm not a financial expert. I'm just going over what I see for our members, and they can choose whether or not they would like to take anything or nothing. It's up to you. Zom on the list. I'm guessing we're probably going to see some downside in oil. It's already starting to happen. So probably going to see some downside for the energy companies as well. Welcome, welcome, everybody who just showed up. iPhone, iPhone 3. Nice to see you again. Heidi's iPhone. Hello. Your girl. My girl. My girl's upstairs. Laharo. Welcome back. Juan Carlos. Hola. I don't think Flip's left. He's got a tab. It's the top one. It says Flips dash VC. What? Where'd that go? It's right there, Caleb. I posted in the window. Right on. In the US EV sector, not not really, but I think Tesla's going to be having some issues. I don't know if Elon's just making a power play and trying to get a larger position in Tesla, or if he's actually like willing to follow through with leaving. Um, maybe it would be good for Tesla if he left. I don't know. Maybe it's time for them to amicably go separate ways. But I mean, NIO has a pretty big foothold in China. BDY, which I think is an over the counter stock, also used to be a Buffett stock. Um, other than that, like we had that huge EV boom a few years ago, and they all like just about every single one of those EV startups have either filed for bankruptcy or are sub dollar penny stocks now. And I don't think there is really like any other US manufacturers for EVs other than your big like your GM and your Ford. But even they said they're dialing back on their EV output because nobody's buying their stuff. So I mean, right now, I guess the leader probably is Tesla, but I don't know how much longer that's going to hold out. All right. Well, let's get to it. All right. We'll start out with Apple. We'll switch to weekly. Apple has got that nice bounce coming out of that gap that we had lined up here. Also, three gap-a-roonies here, these green boxes. These are called trend bar gaps. This is where the move from the bar creates a gap between the previous candle's high and the subsequent candle's low. There's a gap there. It's considered an imbalance and that the market would like to retrace into those imbalances. It's also a sign that price is moving quickly and usually for a reason. So right now on Apple, we had the 3 bars up. They typically come in 3 as taught by L. Brooks. You get your breakaway, your measuring, and your exhaustion gap. The names are pretty self-explanatory. The measuring gap you use for the target to whichever side, and they typically act as support and resistance on the way down. So we got the 3 gaps up. We got the reversal after the exhaustion on Apple. Got the pull down, held the middle of the measuring gap, and now it's pushing back up. I think we're going to see Apple over 200. It made a huge move yesterday, ripped right through that order block there. I think that's a daily order block. Yep. So that's a daily order block right there. Ripped right through it, back to the upside. Didn't even think twice about it. Just kept going. It's already filled this gap now. I think, I mean, I think we might want to pull back maybe just a little, but I think over this week and next week, it's going to keep going up. Their earnings is going to be very interesting, and mostly because they have their Google Vision, their little eyeglass goggle thingamajigger that they've got going on, and they made 80,000, I think, for their. They predicted 80,000, so they made 80,000, and now they're predicting somewhere to 300,000 to 400,000 units to be sold just in 2024. So that might be enough to run it up to 200, but I don't think I don't think it's enough to keep it going. I mean 200 300,000 goggles fine. But what they need to do is they need to figure out how to make the iPhone relevant again. And they need to come up with something I want to say newer than a competing item against Meta, who has their Oculus, I think it is, and nobody's. I mean, it's not mainstream yet. The virtual world isn't mainstream yet, so I think we might be pricing in probably some future projections for Apple. They do have an Apple car in the works. It's been rumored. There's been no timetable on it. It's probably not coming out in 2024, in my opinion. But short term, I think we see Apple. I think it's going to carry up to 200, and then we're probably going to get a melt up here, is what I'm expecting in the markets. AMD, last week I said watch NVIDIA for the NVIDIA break, and AMD is going to follow. And that's exactly what happened. And not only that, but AMD like really ripped when NVIDIA broke out. We were watching, let's see, on the smaller time frame. Yep, this was what we were watching going into Monday, or Tuesday actually, because we didn't have a Monday, and then it broke out in pre-market, and then Nvidia just said see you later, and it's probably going to be over 600. And AMD followed, and I think it's going to be it's going to be what's going to continue here. I think semis are just ripping right now, and we're probably going to continue to see some upside. Let's take a look at the weekly. Big candle up, huge candle, huge. Monthly hitting new all-time highs, and it's just taking off. I'm going to mark off this previous all-time high here, and I'm going to label it previous all-time high. And I assume there will be some sort of support there, as we saw a little bit in pre-market on Thursday, and then again on Friday, if it dipped below and then shot right up off of that number. So I'm going to leave it on my chart because I'm going to expect AMD to want to come back down to this. May not be this week, may not be next week, but I think it's going to come back down and try that previous all-time high. So I'm a little skeptical on AMD because it's on such a rib, but just basically watch Nvidia for right now because all the other semis are going to do whatever Nvidia is doing. Amazon still has not been able to get through this gap on the 6 month. And if I zoom out to the 6 month, oops, sorry, you can see this trend bar gap from the bottom of this candle, the wick here, to the top of this wick. And that's exactly where Amazon is finding some resistance, quite a bit of resistance, actually. It's been pushed down. Let's go back to the weekly. It did get a close above it finally, but it wasn't able to get any follow through. It did give us a bit of a wedge here. I assume that's on the 1 hour. And that was what we were watching for last week. And then we got a break to the downside into here, a rejection of that trend line, and then continuation to the downside into 150. And now it's bouncing back up to 155. Looking at this chart, I mean, this is a strong buy up. But my confidence in Amazon is not as high because mostly because I don't think people are going to be spending as much money on the small things that they have been buying up now. It did put in a lower high here. I was watching for it to come down here and then make a move up. That clearly is not happening. So I'll just go ahead and delete that. It still can't get a close above this previous high here from December 2023. So that's 1, 2, 3 shots it took at this high, and it was not able to get a close. So I'm feeling bearish. I got to feel bearish on Amazon right now. Just looking at the stock, we do have volume increasing on its way up, but again, it hasn't gotten a close over that high. Now, if it pushes and it gets like a nice big bodied candle right up over that high, it gets really high up there, then I'd be looking for some more upside. But right now, it's just not there in my opinion. It did essentially flag going into the close here. And I'm guessing if we drop down on a smaller time frame, that's exactly what we're going to see. We're going to see that flag. So something to keep an eye on. I'm iffy on Amazon at best. Okay. Boeing has been on a move here. And it's been moving. It's been moving down. It did find support at that gap. So I'm going to move this consolidation area over. And this gap right here from this candle to this candle, it also gapped to the upside over that same area. And it bounced almost exactly to this October 2nd candle on this October candle on the monthly. And that's where it bounced back up and ripped to the upside. So keeping an eye on Boeing here. Again, they've just not had the greatest of press. So be watching it with a little bit of skepticism. It was able to hold that 618 line on that retrace from this swing low to this swing high. So far on the monthly, check out the weekly. Nice big hammer. I would expect it to at least try to come up here and fill this gap. Gap. That's going to be on the weekly. Gap weekly. So I'd be looking forward to, I mean, this is a very strong move. Look at this volume coming off of this weekly, off this last weekly. I very much think it wants to at least try to get up there. So I'd be looking for probably a long on Boeing this week, which should be nice for boomer stocks, which have been on a rip lately. That's about something that I would be looking at for a trade. So looking bullish on Boeing. Coin got the break to the downside of that gap and the close and the rejection in that gap. So we had this gap here on the daily, got the pull in, was never even to get up to the 50%, and then dumped out, found support at the larger time frame gap, closed to the downside, and has been closing to further down ever since. Based on the chart, like I don't see any reason why this doesn't return to 70. This feels like it very much wants to return to 70. So I'd be looking short on coin this week. In addition, it did get a close down below the 50%. So I really enjoy fibs and fib retraces. So I took a fib from this last swing low here all the way up to this last high. And the 50% mark is what I'm looking at. And now that it's gotten a close and a push down below that 50%, to me, it feels like it wants to continue down, in my opinion. And maybe put like a stop right at that midpoint of that gap that it could never get to. And then look for it to target 70. What's the risk reward? 3 on that? That's not bad. That's a good risk reward, in my opinion. Now, premiums are going to be high for coins, so maybe not the greatest thing that you want to swing, but it might be a good idea to look at day trades, short trades to the downside. Look for any bounce up. Look for a push down afterward. That's what I'd be looking for. I'd be looking bearish based on this chart for coin. Meta just continuing to get the rip to the upside. It got 384 finally after so long that we've been waiting for it to get there. It finally got up to 380, the 384 mark. I believe that was that a 3-gapper? Or was that just a straight ripper? It's just been straight ripping all the way up. Been looking for long for a while now. And it finally got the return up to that previous high. I think it's going to keep going. I think 400 is in Meta sights. The only thing I'm a little weary is looking at this monthly chart. We're getting this big move up, a little bit of a retrace, found volume on the retrace, and then we're still getting the move up, but volume is dying off, and it's dying off quickly here on the monthly. So it looked like on the weekly, same thing, just smaller bars, smaller and smaller and smaller. So we might be looking at a possible reversal here soon. I think it's probably going to get a push into 400 and then probably want to back off. And then it'll see what earnings is going to be like, which is coming in February. But I did check. There's a big whale out on, I think it's a January 2025s or January 2026s. I don't remember exactly right offhand, but there's like 37 million into Meta 600 calls, and they're still there. They haven't cashed out yet. Before, when I initially spotted it, they had gotten the push up into here, and they got the pullback, and that's what I think it was right here. They got the pullback, and then they rolled out. They had 600 calls for 2024, I think, and then they rolled them out to 2025. And they had made like a ridiculous amount of money because they bottomed down here at the bottom in November of 2022. And they wrote up those 600 calls and then rolled them out. So whoever has $37 million pumped into Meta 600 out the money calls is making a killing right now because Meta has done nothing but go up since November 2022. I'm expecting it to continue going up. Like in my opinion, there's no reason that it's not going to continue going up. The only weary thing that I have is that volume is dying off. So it shows that there might be some a pullback incoming. So again, I'd look for it to push into 400 and then pull back maybe to this trend line before it continues up. But long term, I'm bullish on Meta. Microsoft, new all-time high, big gap up, came out of that flag that we were watching, got the big rip to the upside, just continued up, and it hasn't stopped yet. It pushed into 400. No, it didn't push into 400. So maybe it wants 400 this week. On the daily, we're seeing volume ticking up on these last 3 days. The big move to the upside. it would make sense to me that it wants to at least try 400, maybe 402, before cooling off a little bit. But based on this chart, like there's really no stop in Microsoft right now. Microsoft, Meta, Nvidia, Apple to some extent, they're all just going right now. They're leaders in AI. They've got ridiculous amounts of money on hand. So either there's money pouring into these gigantic companies in like possible a safe play, like investors are rolling their money into the blue chips just in case. But it's not going anywhere else. Like it doesn't seem to be going into like utilities or energy. So those are typically safer sectors when it comes to like what's it called, recession or economic difficulties. But they're not running into those. They're running into the blue chips. So something to keep watching here, because if these big companies are going to keep running, it's going to carry everything else with it, in my opinion. Nvidia, same thing. Nvidia, same thing. I think it's probably is like, look at the volume from Friday. Okay, like they're buying it at $580. They're still buying this thing. And that's just a ridiculous move right there. Okay. This is a lot of momentum into these stocks. So I'm going to be continually be bullish on Nvidia. There's no reason to be bearish anymore, in my opinion. Like I was bearish all through this area right here back in like July and August. And it never came. And now we're back into price discovery mode. We're back above highs. We're touching 600. There's been murmurings of another split. So who knows? I don't see any reason to be short Nvidia right now. Maybe on a pullback, but that's about it. Their earnings is coming in mid to late February. So that's still a lot of time. We could be getting a run up into that. And then I'd be a bit cautious if it's above, I'd say 580, 540, that area. If it's still above this area right here, come mid-February, be a little bit cautious for a possible pullback, because if they pull disappointing earnings, it could get a pretty mean snapback. But right now, there's Nvidia is carrying the market. Roku got the entry here in January. It's getting the push up. It's pushing into that that gap from the monthly here. So we're in there, we're bounced. So we're trying to push back out of it. It's still going, and it's contending with lower time frame gaps at this point on the weekly. So we're bouncing on the monthly, trying to push back through the weekly on Roku. I still think it wants to get back up to the 108 area. I still think this trade is valid. There's no other reason for me to think not. So I'm going to hold on to my calls, and we're going to see where we go. But I still think it wants up. So I'm still bullish on Roku. Tesla, this is what I had last week for Tesla. Looking forward to maybe jump back up to this trend line and reject and go back to the downside. But if I zoom out on Tesla on this weekly chart, we're in a down channel. It's currently in a down channel. It broke this up one, currently in a down, getting rejected on the smaller time frames for this daily gap right here. Couldn't get the follow through to the upside here. Got rejected here, and now it's pulling back. And if whatever is going on with Elon, whether again it's a power play or whether it's a possible change in the guard, we don't know. But definitely something to be watching out for here on Tesla. It's in a downtrend on the weekly, and it's reversed course at this point. So in the larger time frame here, is rejecting this 50 line here in late December and pulling back. So what that blue line is there is a 50 from that swing. And we're getting increasing volume on the way down. So maybe it doesn't get this bounce. Maybe it just straight up goes to the downside here before going back up. But right now, that's a longer time frame. Okay. If this was something that you maybe wanted to day trade or maybe even swing trade a few contracts, I mean, I'm not really seeing anything that I personally would be willing to put a trade in. Maybe if it gets down to this trend line, I'd look for a long, or if it gets up to this trend line, I'd look for a short. Like that's really the only trade I'd be looking at right now. When it gets to those trend lines, it very much looks ranged. I don't think it's going to be doing anything anytime soon. Maybe drop down to this trend line here, but that's about all I can see. So right now, as far as a trade on Tesla, I wouldn't even wait, or I wouldn't take one. I would wait for it to touch one of those trend lines and find support or resistance at those trend lines. They do. They have earnings Wednesday as well. So maybe it gets a dump out going toward it, or maybe it gets a buy up going toward it. I don't know. But it's right in the middle of everything here. Not really something I'd want to take a trade on. Now, when it comes closer to earnings, when it comes closer to Wednesday, it's going to be a little bit more important to see where it's at. And if we're at support, maybe you YOLO a cheap contract or two on an upside move. It depends. They might have some news coming out too. Who knows? It's a big one. So something to keep an eye on this week. Right now, I'm not really seeing a trade on Tesla. So SPY. For those who don't know how the three gap system works, we're going on a weekly here. We had been watching this for a while. For anyone who's new, we had the first gap, which is breakaway gap, the second gap, which is your measuring gap, and then the third gap, which is your exhaustion gap. You take a line going from the swing low to the middle of the measuring gap. You duplicate that line, you push it up, get it to meet with the other one. And that's how you would project your price target based on using this theory. And that's exactly where we went to. Now, because we have earnings coming up, I think we're going to push higher. We're going to melt up as a result. I had originally thought we would push into this price target and then pull back, but I don't really feel like that's going to be happening right now. And the main reason is because of earnings. Okay. I think earnings is going to end up melting us up, and we're going to start anticipating some stuff. So what I think is actually going to happen is we're probably going to push up over this price target. I don't know if we're going to hit 500. We might. And then all those silly images that River has been posting of SPY to 500 are going to become true. And it's going to be kind of funny, not going to lie. But I think we're going to get a melt up, especially in anticipation of earnings. And then we'll see if we're going to get the pull back or if we're going to get maybe a flag or some structure going. But right now we're on a rip. We're hitting price targets. We're over all time highs, and we're on a truck going toward up a mountain, trying to hit a ramp to go to the moon, in my opinion. That's where the markets I feel want to go at. So I think we're going to melt up on SPY. Probably going to melt up the same on tech. They seem to be doing the exact same thing. They already hit their price target on the three gap system. So we got the three gaps, breakaway measuring, exhaustion. They got the push into the price target, the melt up a little bit, the pull back, and then the continuation. So if anything, we could be looking at the cues for a possible model to what happens to the S&P. So going back to the S&P, we could melt up, create a gap here on the weekly chart, get a push up, and then a pull back into this gap for a continuation to the upside. And that's maybe into February, depending on how earnings are going to start panning out. But right now, everything is looking bullish unless you're in IWM and small caps, in which case we might see a little bit of a bounce based on Friday's buy up or last week's buy up, I mean. But I mean, looking at the larger picture on IWM, it's a very ranged. It took out the previous lows. It's taken out the previous highs. I think I think it's getting ready for a move, but not yet. So the push down in October took out all the lows for all of 2022, all of 2021, and all of 2023. And then it ripped to the upside where it took out all the highs for everything from August 2022 and on. And now it's pulling back again. So before we zoom in here, we see we never really took the highs. We never took the lows. We just tightened up a little bit. Now we swung down, got those stops, swung back to the upside, got these stops, and now we're pulling back. So I'm still bearish down to the 160s. I think it might want to just come down here and wreck all these stops before going up. That's what I'm thinking. If it sees some support and it rips to the upside here back over 215, I'm going to be bearish. I'm going to be bearish, and I think it's going to come to the downside. So whichever side it takes out first is the side I'm going to trade opposite. Okay. So if it comes out and it takes out all these highs, I'm going to trade bearish on it. That's what I would do. If it goes down and it takes out all these lows one last time, I'm going to be bullish on it because I think it's going to run to the upside. I think it could be part of it since there's so many regional and small banks in the Russell 2000. But I think the catalyst for it is, I mean, we're looking at stuff like IWM, right? And it's still holding above, relatively above these 2018 and these 2020 highs. Like it hasn't dipped far below. It's consolidating above this area. To give a visual here, it's consolidating above these highs. It's dipped down below them a few times, but every time it dips down below, it gets bought up. So now, if we look at, say, plug, which is in the Russell, it is very much not ranged. It has been beat up and it has been beat down hard. And we're seeing this, I'm seeing this in a lot of small cap companies. So I think what's going to be the catalyst for IWM and small caps are two things: the rate decision and finding favor in the small regional banks and getting them to be able to lend more money to more people, which allows them to generate more fees and more interest, which allows them to create more income. And the fact that the majority, I think, of the Russell is so beat up that that people are gonna start buying up these stocks, and it's gonna be a whirlwind. So if we switch back out to IWM and it comes down here and takes these stops out, I mean, you still got IWM stocks that are at all-time lows or relatively close, and IWM is nowhere near that. So if it comes down and it gets all these stops, I think we're going to start seeing things rip. So something like this would be, if it comes down, I'd maybe look at my plugs and my F cells and my smaller market cap IWM Russell companies, and maybe, you know, start looking at shares or leaps. Who knows what could happen? If it runs to the upside and takes these out and I'm looking bearish, well, I mean, all the other ones are so beat up, it doesn't really matter. How much further can you go down when your stock was $80 2 years ago and now it's $1? You know, there's not much more you could go down, right? Then I'd be looking to trade, you know, maybe puts on IWM at that point. But right now, I think we're going to continue down. That's the direction I feel it's going to go. It seems to be where it's headed. We'll see. It is finding support at this gap. We are in a 3-gap system. It is finding support at that exhaustion gap. It could very well turn around and head back to the upside, but I'm still feeling bearish on it. And diamonds, they went. So there's a 3-gap system from Al Brooks, and the diamonds went 5 gaps and are now consolidating above that gap. So there seems to be a lot of support in the boomer stocks and the diamonds and the Dow Jones here. And I mean, if it can stay above that 370 mark, that previous high, I mean, it looks like it wants to continue going based on these last, 5 weeks of price action here. It hasn't even pulled back. So if it pulls back to 367 here, if we get a move to the downside here, I would be looking at longs, and I'd be looking at, new all-time highs. I would target to start a 3-to-1 risk reward with a stop just on the other side of that gap if it pulls into here. And then I would move my stop up as it goes, if the diamonds are something that you'd want to look into. I'll add NIO to the list and we'll take a look at it. Goldman Sachs got the dip to the downside, the rip to the upside, still wasn't able to get over that. These past couple of weeks, it didn't even get back to the upside here. I still think banks want to come back down. And the reason for that mostly is we're seeing rejection here on Goldman, and then Morgan Stanley never even got up to that level, and it already completed the trade that we had. Starting to bounce here. Looks like it probably wants to die off a bit more. So I'm feeling bearish on banks. Netflix. Oh, excuse me. Netflix got the push back into 500, still not able to hold it. I still feel bearish on Netflix. I can't not feel bearish on Netflix. Just based on the chart, they can't get over and hold 500. It feels like they just want to, it feels like it wants to dump out. So I'm feeling bearish on Netflix. And that just happens to line up with a 618 fib retrace as well. Go figure. I think it wants to return to 162 in the long run. So something to keep an eye on them. Their earnings is going to be pretty big. Their subscriber counts, how much they have gained or lost over things like HBO and Disney Plus. So something to watch out for that. Their earnings is at the end of the month here. Speaking of Disney, it is getting a push to the upside and a break out of this down channel. I really wanted it to come down to these February 2016 lows before taking a long on it, but it has decided to break out and try to push up here. So it didn't really get like a definitive breakout, in my opinion. It got a push up and then an immediate pullback, then a push up and a push up again, but it was never able to take that high. So I'm a little skeptical on it, but Disney looks like it wants to push up here and not even come down and get my trigger. So something to keep an eye on. If you want to take, if I was looking to take something on Disney, I would maybe set a stop at the bottom there and target these 96 prices. That's not even a 2-to-1. So I don't even know if that would be worth my time on that. Their earnings is coming up, I think, in February. Yeah, earnings is February 7th. So we might get a run up here in anticipation of earnings, at which time we'll probably realize that they don't have the subscriber count that people thought they were. General Motors triggered along here from last week while we were watching it. Still looking for a push up into 41. Seems to be moving that direction. So keep an eye on that. I would maybe short my stop here to get it to a 3-to-1 risk ratio. But GM is looking bullish. Chewy is looking bearish. I still think it wants to come down to 17, 16 and a half. Still push down into that. NVIDIA, we already hit. NVIDIA basically is probably going to keep going, in my opinion. There's nothing really stopping NVIDIA from continuing to go up. So keep an eye on NVIDIA for continuing move to the upside. And then watch the laggards as well in the semiconductor sphere. Okay. So watch your Intels. Intel just got a breakout to the upside on the daily. SMCI has been on an absolute rip. They are also carrying. TSM got a nice move up after earnings. Big move to the upside. Took out some of those highs. Pushing up. Very bullish on TSM as well. So I'm looking at things like QCOM for a move up to those previous highs. AMAT also got to move up to that high. MU. The thing about Micron is that most of their business is tied up in DIMM memory, and people just aren't buying computers at the same rate they were 10 years ago. So I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing such not as big of moves on Micron as we are in the rest of the semiconductor area. But if they if they have something in the works here, they could definitely try to make a move to the upside. Broadcom has been on an absolute rip, taking out every target we had set up, got all the way back up, and is just continuing to go. So, not really seeing any reason for Broadcom to stop. It got the nice pullback, then the push up, and it's just continuing to go. ASML also returning to those previous highs. And then Marvel Technology also taking out its highs. I would take a look at Skyworks. Skyworks is nowhere near those previous highs. So Skyworks, Qualcomm, Intel. Intel's probably the better bet, in my opinion. They've been around longer. They know what they're doing. They got the pullback into that gap, and now they're pushing up on a breakout. I think they're going to continue moving, and they're pretty beat up after a lot of issues. But Intel would probably be my choice in the semiconductor for some more upside. Going back to the list that we had going here, PayPal, that Head and Shoulders is playing out nicely. I mean, it duped us for a rip to the downside, and then got bought up hard when it hit 56, and it's just going straight up. I'm expecting it to return to this gap right here, which is why I set that price target here. But I'm expecting for it to return to at least 70, maybe push into 71. Well, you could trade the ones like AVGO that are at their all-time highs, but the in my opinion, the better risk to reward is going to be on the semiconductor companies that aren't at their all-time highs. They're going to benefit the most from companies like Nvidia and AMD and Broadcom ripping on all that news, on all that momentum, and they seem to be doing pretty well. So I would look at maybe some of the other companies that are a bit beat up and nowhere near their all-time highs for a catch up, as more of a risk to reward, if that makes sense, Stella. SMCI. I mean, Norbert wanted me to touch on SMCI. It's the chart speaks for itself. Like, I mean, he was talking to us about SMCI back in August, and when it was around two, I want to say he's been talking about it since it was sub 200. But it's just been on a rip. It's at 423 now. I can't say anything, right? Does he know? I mean, the company is just on a rip, and it's also carrying part of the semiconductors now because it's at all-time highs, I believe. Yeah, I mean it's at all-time highs. Look at the weekly volume ripping up over these highs. That from August 2023, like this is a ridiculous amount of volume. People are buying up SMCI for a reason. He also wanted me to touch on VRT. VRT, on the other hand, I mean, it's up here at all-time highs, up at 53. But look how much volume is just dying off here into this push on a weekly level. Let's check out a monthly. Yep. So we're getting this big move up on VRT, and volume is just dying. So I would be a bit hesitant of a pullback on VRT. Let's measure out some gaps here. Gapper. Gapper. So breakaway gap, measuring gap, exhaustion gap. Pull back into the exhaustion gap, move back up to the upside, but we're not gapping. There's no gap between these wicks. So it's showing a lack of momentum. So it's getting the push up. It's losing momentum. It's losing volume. I would expect a pullback on VRT. So Norby, if you're watching, I'm looking for a pullback on VRT. As far as a stop, I would look for it to at least try this gap again, and then I would adjust my stop accordingly. Right around there. So 60 for a stop. That seems like a good one. Okay. And he wanted me to check on RMBS, another semiconductor company, I assume, that has been on a complete tear. But again, is that not at all-time highs? It's got the volume going up. It's got the move, got the chop to the upside. Considerably lower volume on these new highs, though. So here's where it got the big volume. And it's getting a higher high, but considerably lower volume. So something to watch out there for as well. Looks like it could be prepping for another pullback. So that's RMBS. We'll hit up BABA here. BABA break to the downside on the weekly. Continuation back below that low, but it's getting bought up. Volume getting bigger as price is going down. So I'd take this hammer from the last week with a grain of salt based on that. It did get some nice buy up volume there, but it took out the highs and lows of the last 2 days, filling a gap. It just feels bearish to me. Looks like it feels bearish to me. I can't really say anything else. I feel like it might want some more lows. So we'll see. ZOM did not get the long that I was looking for, and it came and it stopped me out. This is going to be something that is finally breaking to the downside. So you can tell, been watching this for a while. It's been holding these lows from March, held them here, got the push up, but eventually is now breaking to the downside of these lows, and it's staying there. Okay. I feel like ZOM is going to want to push to the downside, and ZOM is very much going to like depend on where oil is going to be going. And if I take a look at oil here, let's look at crude futures. It's very much feeling bearish in my opinion. We took that liquidity here, and now we're just getting a big push to the downside. It feels like it wants to break down further, probably down to around 44, 48. We'll see if it wants to get down there over the next couple of weeks here. But oil is feeling bearish. Definitely feeling bearish on oil. You could take a trend line here if you really wanted to and wait for a downside. It's getting tight here. Wicks to the upside and to the downside, but I think it wants to make a move down. So if oil makes a move down, you're going to want to take some. I would look at some puts on ZOM and other oil companies, CVX, CXV, CVX. They haven't taken out their lows yet, but volume is going up on the weekly. I'd be looking at shorts on oil companies, to be honest. Yeah, what were the lows? Let's see, COVID lows. I mean, the COVID lows are up here for Bob at 171. Like it's well below COVID lows. And it's holding down there. We got some structure. It's breaking to the downside. Feeling like a very bearish chart to me on BABA. And NIO. NIO had I felt like it had some momentum going into I felt like it really had some momentum. It got a big push into that gap. I think that's on the daily. That gap right there. Yep. Tried to fill it, almost got there, and now it's just dying off. So for whatever reason, investors don't seem to be too keen on NIO in the US stock market, I'm pretty sure they own like a pretty large market share in China, if not like the majority of it. So something to keep an eye on. There's a long way down to $1. So let's see what else. Ribbon. Rivian also pushing down, tried to cup and handle, got a big break to the downside, and it's now pushing back down. Volume basically, with exception to Friday, it had lower volume, but its volume is going up on the way down. It might pull up a little bit, but Rivian definitely feels like it's going down. What's the other one? Starts with an L, right? Beside Tesla, I didn't really like any current trade on Tesla based on the chart because it's right in the middle of a channel. So I personally would look forward to get to one of these trend lines before taking a counter trend trade on it. Lucid, that's what it is. Lucid also just dying. I mean, EVs are just dying off right now. So if the rest of the market is um, any indicator for Tesla, I mean the three other largest EV stocks, presumably being NIO, Lucid, and Rivian, if they're all dying off, it would make sense that Tesla would follow, or it would make sense that investors run to Tesla. But right now, just based on this chart, I'm not seeing any breakout. I'm not seeing any big move. Volume is staying steady. I'd assume it's going to come back down to this trend line, but I think the better risk to reward would be waiting for it to get to that trend line before making a decision on whether or not I wanted to go long or short. If that made sense. Whew. There's a lot of stocks. Let's take a look at some of the market sectors. See, here's the thing, right? Like looking at the bank ETF, the ETF feels like maybe it's a little bit stronger, in my opinion. But then you look at some of the leaders here. Did get a breakout and a push up. Still not at that previous high though. JP Morgan got a push above all-time highs and then a pull down, a break to the downside of this big up channel right here. And now it's breaking to the downside. Bank of America got a push to the downside, back up to the upside of this channel, and now it's breaking to the downside, nowhere near its all-time, its previous. Is that all-time high? No, not all-time high, but nowhere near these previous highs around 50, like JP Morgan. Let's try the right letters. Nowhere near these highs, like Morgan is. Okay, and Morgan is at highs that other leaders like Goldman and Morgan Stanley are not at. So I can't help but feel bearish on banks, despite the fact that XLF is looking bullish. It hit its price target on the three gaps to the upside, chopping along, break down, push to the upside. I still feel like it wants to come down. XLE, very, in my opinion, doing exactly what like the big oil companies are doing right now. It's got to break back to the downside of this trend, and it's probably just going to continue, especially if inflation is not going to be a thing anymore. If the Fed made inflation go away, right? Oil tends to be an inflationary hedge, and if oil is coming down because they're not looking that inflation is not going to be as big of a deal, we're starting to see oil come down as a result. We're starting to see energy companies come down as well. Utility companies also coming back down. Well, utilities and energy tend to be where people go when there's uncertainty, and they're dropping off. So I don't see any reason why. We're probably looking at an actual soft landing. I don't know what Flux is. Flux Power Holdings. Nice flag there on the daily. I'm going to go down to an hourly here. Volume is dying off well in a structure. That is a plus. Did technically get a break to the upside here. Feels like it wants to go up. My only concern is that it didn't break this high before flagging, nor did it really get super close. I mean, I guess it got close. It got within 10 cents. I'll call it close. I would prefer if it pushed over and then flagged, but it didn't. So it is what it is. Monthly chart. That's nice. That's a bit more of a better breakout on the monthly. If this pushes down any further, though, and you get a big hammer on this monthly at the end of the month, I would look for some more downside, though. I'd like to see some strength on this breakout. It does have volume going up, so I'd like to see it continue to go up on this monthly. Really want to see it. I would really want to see it get back over 5 and continue back up. So 5, I think, is going to be a pretty big mental barrier. That seems to be where they got stopped out right there, 502. So 5's, I would rather get into a long if it gets back over 5, but that's just me. Any other tickers that you'd like me to take a look at? I'm going to take a drink of water. Biotech. I was looking at this and I was like, well, that's a nice move to the upside. And then I just zoomed out and I was like, oh, it's nowhere near any highs. The XBI, the biotech ETF looks ranged, is what it looks like to me. So it's just chilling, moving sideways, waiting for another pandemic. In my opinion, since we're getting to this previous high right here, actually that we just about almost touched. I would look for a trade to the downside, to be honest. A lot of volume since September 2023, though. So there was a bit of a lull there as it dipped out, got the push back up. My opinion on the overall sector of biotech, unless someone's going to cure cancer, I don't really, there's not really much there, in my opinion. I mean, it got the big rev up on COVID, and now it's getting the dumpster Rooney on COVID because nobody's taking their shots anymore, right? It is holding those COVID lows. So you've got that going for it, but very much doesn't feel like it's doing anything. It's just moving sideways in the larger picture. The shorter picture, I would almost expect to move back to the downside of this range. Looking at the 1 hour here. So we got to move. Get down there. We got to move below this previous swing low here. So it came down here, dipped up, revved up to new highs, and then it's now hitting a lower low. Okay, so this is showing a break in market structure, and I would expect this to come back down. That's my opinion on the overall sector. It feels bearish. Looking at things like mRNA, I mean, they're nowhere near where they were, and now they're below. Are they below COVID highs? I mean, they dipped below, came back up. Looking at your NVAXs, just returned to a penny stock. BTNX, is that what it is? BNTX? BNTX. Also down there. Let's see, where was the COVID rip? It's right around 2020. So they're not quite at COVID lows yet, but they're holding. They're in a nice, just continuing down, in my opinion. What's Pfizer doing? I mean, Pfizer just died off. They completed the short to the downside. They bounced. And they're the military's producer of COVID vaccines. Okay, so if investors said, okay, yeah, we don't even want Pfizer anymore, what else are they going to do? Johnson and Johnson holding up there. Johnson and Johnson seemed a bit more strength, also a bit more of a flexible company, not really reliant on, um, excuse me, not really reliant on the vaccinations for sales. They got their hands in plenty of other things. So biotech, I feel, is feeling a bit bearish. Shop here. I was watching this channel, got to break to the downside. Actually thought I was looking for a long trade coming into this channel, and then it broke to the downside and took me out, and then bounced, and then came back, broke to the downside again, filled that gap, and then just ripped back up into the channel, bounced again at that channel, and is continuing up. So, I mean, in my opinion, it's showing strength. And maybe look at some possible like July calls around 110 or so. Target structure break to the downside, push down, gap up. Can't quite get over that 50% there. See that? It's wicked above it. It's never able to close above it. Now it's got the push back down. The market structure on this feels like it wants to return back to sub 100 into the 90s. Despite the fact this arrow is pointing up, it's not doing that. It never got the push back above this 50% line and found support. If it does, sure, but it doesn't look like it's doing it right now. Very much feels like it's running out of gas. You got price coming down, volume going up as price is coming down. What's up, Norbert? So Target feeling bearish, never was able to get the close over that 50. I would be more bearish on this back to the 90s. Feels like it wants to drop back down. Let's take a look at Walmart too. While we're here, break to the downside, the push back up, stopped. Right in the middle of that gap. Is that a monthly gap? Daily gap? Where's this gap? Oh, it's the big gap. It's the big gap. Stopped right at it, pulled right back. Still in an uptrend. So hasn't quite changed course yet. As a matter of fact, it has pushed over these highs, found support, and pushed to the upside. So Walmart feeling bullish, maybe up to 167. Possibly a run up on Intuit if I, possibly. Here's the thing though. If you Google it, you'll find that the IRS is allowing people to file directly for free, e-filing, which I think is going to take a lot of revenue away from these companies. I don't know why they're doing it. Maybe they're just sick of dealing with these companies and they don't want to do them anymore. So they're just offering it to free for people. But if you haven't filed your taxes yet, look at that. I do believe the IRS is allowing people to e-file for free directly with them, and you don't have to go through any of these companies. I don't know if they have software to do your taxes for you, like TurboTax or anything like that. But if they do, that means they're trying to push these companies out, which could be a bad sign for them. Yep. So I would feel bearish on them. There's no market switch yet. There's no change in direction. They're still in an uptrend, but I'm feeling bearish on them. Costco. Rippity doo dah, rippity a. My oh my, what a nice all time high. So we have a breakaway gap. See you, Dalla. Have a good night. See you in the Discord. And then we have our measuring gap. And we take a measure from that last swing to here. And then we duplicate it. What is going on here? I duplicated it twice, didn't I? I did. Measuring gap here. That puts us at a price target roughly 766 or so. And we haven't had an exhaustion gap yet. I would wait for an exhaustion gap maybe, but you could probably take a long here and adjust. I would probably take a long here and adjust my stop accordingly. That's not the greatest risk to reward. Let me go down to a lower time frame. Okay, so we have this previous high here. Have this previous high here. Just shore up that stop a bit. But that's what I'd be looking at. Feeling bullish on Costco. Yeah, man, you've been talking to us about SMCI for so long, and it just ripped and went bonkers. It's pretty crazy stuff. So feeling bullish on SMCI VRT. I do believe I was looking for a pullback, was I? Yeah. So looking at the weekly here, got the big move to the upside, pushing into all-time highs. Volume is dying off. There it is, the monthly. So you got the three gaps to the upside. We're in exhaustion territory. We're not gapping as we continue to the upside. Volume is dying off as it continues to go up. I'd be looking at a short on VRT. And RBS, similar situation. Volume going or price going up, volume going down. Feeling like it might want to pull back as well. All right, we covered a lot of stuff. I'm going to need to watch the recording just to make sure I know what I'm talking about next week. It is about 8:45 my time, 9:45 Eastern time. If you got to take off, I appreciate you for stopping out. Appreciate your time. SPX is going to be the same as SPY iPhone. I think it's going to melt up on earnings anticipation. And I think we're probably going to push into 500. Maybe this week, maybe next week. So I mean, it could very well go to 600. I don't think it's going to 600 anytime soon, though. Well, I appreciate you too, Joe. Have yourself a good night. If you got to go, feel free to take off. I'm probably not going to touch on a whole lot of new stuff here. Thank you for coming. You can find the recording in the Discord. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. Depends on how much gas I have left in the tank. But thanks for stopping out, and I hope to see you around. Anybody got anything else? You are welcome, Manicure. Manicure. Not new car. I probably butchered that, and I'm sorry. All right. That's going to be it then. Hope you guys have a guys, gals, non-binary pals have a good week. I'll see you in the Discord. Hit me up in the futures channel. Ask our staff if you have any questions. They are there to help you. Take care.